In 2008, iodparc was contracted to conduct the evaluation of the decentralization strategy and process in the African Development Bank. In addition to more traditional evaluation methods such as formal organizational analysis and perception surveys, the most significant change methodology was used. The following video presents interviews with the evaluation's team leaders reflecting on the use of most significant change in this piece of work.
Most significant change was originally designed as a form of participatory monitoring, and it was designed to try and capture stories of change, particularly changes that weren't easily identified through the use of predetermined indicators, changes that were unexpected or perhaps of disputed significance or meaning. So it's about identifying changes, significant changes, and it's about doing that using a systematic and transparent social process, and that involves collecting stories from different participants and then having a structured selection process whereby they come together and identify the most significant of those, and sometimes those stories in turn will be pulled from stories collected by a similar process elsewhere and then pulled together, and then there'll be a further selection process. So you can, like a newspaper, will find the most significant story of the day and put it on the front of the newspaper, at the top of the front of the newspaper. Well, that sort of similar selection process goes on with MSC.
It was partly to try and bring in an innovative element to try and make what could be potentially quite a sort of dry, heavy feeling evaluation, give it something else, a bit of a spark really, and particularly to try and bring in the human element, I think, bring that up right central, to give the whole thing a bit of a different impetus and a different feel to it. And the other reason was more in terms of the actual substance of the evaluation, was to try and really get into what is making the human beings within the bank tick. How are they operating in this new decentralized environment? How are they feeling about it? So again, to really try and get to the core on some of the critical human issues.
We didn't have to make too many adaptations. I suppose the biggest change we made was bring in the use of video, which we hadn't done before, but that's been done in other contexts as well, not just in large bureaucracies. I think because we were part of an evaluation, we had to document the process perhaps a bit more thoroughly than what we would have in other more participatory evaluations. I think the main thing that was new was simply doing it in a large bureaucracy. This method had been designed for use in participatory rural development projects, whereas we were turning around and applying it within a huge bureaucracy. And my initial thought was that this will never ever work, and I'd never ever considered using it in a large bureaucracy. But I was pleasantly surprised how it did work.
I guess one thing that struck me was, from somebody who hadn't really worked with MSC previously, was that there is quite a rigour to it. And I think often people will throw in the term most significant change, probably thinking it is largely around talking to people and getting their stories, but actually there is quite a lot of rigour in the whole process.
We did, I think, identify a number of new and unexpected aspects of the decentralisation process, and ideally they would be the sort of things that the rest of the evaluation process would pick up and explore, and which it might have otherwise ignored if it hadn't found them out through the MSC process. I think that happened in some cases to do with, for example, how trust was emerging between the newly decentralised offices and the headquarters as a result of small-scale experimentation with more decentralised approaches, and I think that popped up and received attention in the report.
I think it also gave us a take on some issues that we wouldn't have got otherwise. And also allowed us to recognise that you learn as much sometimes about what is said as you learn as much about what isn't said as what is said, and therefore gives you an opportunity to look at, if you like, the amount of energy and words that are written about a certain topic or policy direction of the bank on one hand, and what people are actually talking about on the ground, and you can see a big divergence in certain areas, and that was very revealing, which you wouldn't have got probably otherwise, because again, hearing the voices and reading the stories brings that out more strongly. Shortcomings, inevitably it's resource intensive. You wouldn't get any value out of it unless you invested the right level of resources, and I think we were operating close to the edge of where we didn't have sufficient resources. I think we just had enough to get something quality out of it, but that meant that clearly within a budget that takes quite a big proportion out. So in terms of what you actually probably get in terms of the end product, or what you think you get as the end product in its own right that comes from an MSC source, doesn't stack up very well against the resources that you think you directly put in the MSC. But I think overall you have a much better and stronger product by adding that component into an evaluation of this type than you would have done otherwise. And for that reason I think people should really look at how to use this in a creative way for other big evaluations of this nature.
I think originally the design was that we would do the collection and selection of most significant change stories first, and then there would be this thing called the formal organisational assessment and the perception survey next. But I think because of constraints on time, the other formal assessment of the organisation ended up having to some extent in parallel, and I think that made it more difficult for that stage to be informed by the most significant change process. The idea was the most significant change process would generate hypotheses and ideas that would be picked up and selectively explored by the next stage of the evaluation, whereas I think they had to charge ahead without taking on board as much as might have been taken on board from the MSC.
One of the things I would have done would have introduced more focus group type work towards the latter stages of the evaluation, which particularly would have tried to have brought together different groups from head office and field officers, perhaps through video links, and perhaps using some of the footage that we got from the MSC exercise to actually discuss around certain issues and bring some of the stories from the MSC work into that. I don't think we did that as effectively as we could have done, and that would have brought out a little bit more of the richness of what was changing. We kind of, I think mainly because of time constraints towards the end, we tended to sort of go into a more traditional mode of how we're going to write the report, how are we going to present evidence against the different dimensions of the results chain, which we built up as part of the evaluation exercise, and that became a more mechanical process, whereas I think we could have both enriched that and maybe made it in some respects more, both stronger but maybe more efficient, if we'd have had a focus group step before we actually got into starting to write a report. I think one final thought on the use of the MSC in this kind of situation is the potential to use it as an exercise from which you then actually frame a more detailed set of terms of reference for an evaluation, because it allows you to really come at it quite fresh and not burdened by the normal superstructure of an evaluation of efficiency, effectiveness, impact, etc., and actually allows you to really start to expose what are some of the real live issues that people are dealing with and people are feeling. And actually, for an evaluation of the type that decentralisation work was, which was very much forward-looking, it really allows you to frame something which is more carefully geared to that, to add value to that forward trajectory, which sometimes a more heavy, dense, classically built evaluation struggles with.